Comments by the defense?
Your Honor, we've marked the sections that we have objections to. Now, may I approach?
trying to draw the line on what's permissible about Shannon and Chris and their characters and the impact on the family. Couple things that are in here that I can't allow is I can't allow the witness to address the remarks to the defendant as much as you would like to, and I can't allow the witnesses to advocate positions related to sentencing to the jury directly, because that's the job of the state's attorney. I do think there's a lot in here about Shannon and Chris' loving nature, background, and childhood that is definitely admissible, and some of the remarks of hurt to the family and memories of the children are admissible. But some I have excluded, and while I have to recognize that you may disagree with the judge's decision, I have to ask you to respect the decision I've made. Any variance from this in non-compliance of my order could be problematic as it relates to the sentence, which I think is the sentence that you probably would advocate, which is life without parole. I'm going to take I'm going to mark what I think should be excluded in yellow, and then I'm going to give it to the state's attorney and give him an opportunity to go over that with you. And here again, I have the greatest sympathy for the position you're in, but I have to ensure that the standards of the court related to victim impact testimony is followed. So let me take a short recess to mark this, and I ask for counsel to come back in chambers, and I'll give the state's attorney what I've marked, and then we'll take it from there. Thank you.
What's this? Mr. Price, let me return these photographs to you, which I believe the defense has no objection to.
Well, I think the way we do that is before they start their statement, we'll have the mothers identify these photographs that go with each.
Okay. Okay, we ready for the jury?
State's ready.
All right. bring the jury out? Please. Members of the jury, we have found the defendant guilty of first-degree murder of both Shannon Christian and Hugh Christopher Newsom, and will now have a hearing to determine whether you sentence the defendant to life without parole or just a life sentence. The parties will now have an opportunity to make a short opening statement, then you'll hear some proof from the state and some proof from the defense on this issue. Then we'll probably take a short recess but then shortly thereafter you'll hear the closing arguments of the attorneys on the issue of sentencing and then my instructions as to the law. All right, State's Attorney.
You have done the first part. Listened to all the proof and determined whether or not the defendant is guilty of the first-degree murder of Shannon Christian, Chris Newsom, and felony murder of both of them. Now the second part. And in this part we want to focus in on the circumstances surrounding their deaths. Keep in mind, Shannon, what she is thinking after she has suffered through what she has suffered through, the oral rapes, the vaginal rapes, the anal rapes, the bruising to her head, the bruising to her vaginal region. And she's tied there, and she's hog-tied, and she's trying to get out of those bindings, and she can't, and she hears trash bags being pulled out of the box. And she's got to be thinking, what's going on? Because all she can do is hear voices around. And she feels the trash bag, that white trash bag, around her face. And she feels the next trash bag encasing her body. She feels herself being lifted up. Put into the first trash bag, and she feels herself being lifted up yet again and put into the second trash bag. Lifted up and put into the third trash bag. What is she thinking? And she's got to still believe that she's some kind of way she's going to get out of this. Total of 5 trash bags. And she's still alive. She's still struggling to live. And then she feels herself being lifted up and stuffed in the trash can. And she's still breathing. Even though she's got that trash bag around her face. She can hear what's going on around her. And then she hears the lid being placed over the trash can. Her eyes are open. And eventually all the air runs out and she dies. In the sentencing phase, we have noticed the defendant. There are 3 aggravating circumstances that we're relying upon that we're going to actually find beyond a reasonable doubt for Shannon Christian's death. And that is that the killing was heinous, atrocious, or cruel. And we believe that the testimony from Dr. Lewison's testimony establishes that. We believe the autopsy photographs establish that, as well as the autopsy. The second one is that we believe that there is proof beyond a reasonable doubt that her murder was committed for the purpose of avoiding for interfering with or preventing a lawful arrest or prosecution of the defendant or another. That's the second. Basically what that means is the reason that she was killed is because she was a witness. Keep in mind, if she had survived, she had taken the witness stand, she would have been able to tell you exactly where she and Chris were when the carjacking took place. Who had guns, how they were able to overpower she and Chris, exactly who was there for the carjacking. She would have been able to tell you exactly who was in the house at 2316 Chicken Street. She would have been able to tell you who had removed the blindfold from her eyes. She would have been able to tell you the exact number of times that she was raped orally, the exact number of times she was raped vaginally, the exact number of times she was raped anally, and by what? Whether it was only Mr. Davidson's penis or Mr. Collins' penis or whether or not it was an option. There's no other reason to kill this Christian but for the fact that she's a witness. I mean, they had all of the property. They didn't know her. It's not like she did something to make them mad. And so it was, out of vengeance that killed her. The only reason she was killed is because of her knowledge. She knew exactly who had committed these crimes against her and Chris. Number 3 is that the murder of Shannon was committed. The murder was not only committed, solicited, directed, or aided by the defendant while the defendant had a substantial role in committing or attempting to commit, or was fleeing after having a substantial role in committing or attempting to commit any first-degree murder, Hugh Christopher Newsom, any rape of Shannon Christian or oral penetration, any rape by Shannon Christian by vaginal penetration, any rape by Shannon Christian by anal penetration, any rape by Hugh Christopher Newsom by anal penetration, any kidnapping of Shannon Christian, any kidnapping of Hugh Christopher Newsom, any robbery of Shannon Christian, or any robbery of Hugh Christopher Newsom. That goes back to the felony murder counts that they were found guilty. The extra that we've got to prove is that the defendant had a substantial role in the commission of those crimes. And so we would ask that you find that we have proven to you, beyond a reasonable doubt, those aggravating circumstances as it relates to Shannon Christian's murder. On Mr. Newsom's murder, we have given notice of 4 aggravating circumstances. And again, I want you to think about his death and Christian's murder. On Mr. Newsom's murder, we have given notice of 4 aggravating circumstances. And again, I want you to think about his death, how it came about. Think about the humiliation that he had to feel that he was not able to protect his girlfriend from these folks. How he must have felt having his shoes removed from his feet, his socks removed from his feet, tasting his own sweat from those socks as the socks were stuffed in his mouth, blindfold around his eyes. Again, he can hear what's going on. He can hear people. He can hear voices. He can't see anything. He doesn't know if Shannon is okay. He doesn't know where he's at because he's never been to this location. He's helpless. His hands are bound. His legs are bound. It's cold outside. He has no shoes. He has no pants. He suffered the humiliation of an object. We know there was at least a penis being shoved in his hands. Filling with mud on the bottoms of his feet. Being forced to walk in his bare feet outside. And as he's standing there with his back bent, anticipating being raped yet again, and feeling the first bullet piercing his back, and the second bullet piercing his back, and he can't survive any longer when the third bullet pierces his skull. He believed that his death, again, from the proof of the medical examiner, the autopsy photographs, and the autopsy itself, we believe that it establishes, number one, that the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, and that it involved torture or serious physical abuse beyond that necessary to produce death. You just needed that one bullet to the head to kill. The rest was completely unnecessary. Again, the same as Ms. Christian, this murder, we believe, was committed for the purpose of avoiding, interfering with, or preventing the lawful arrest or prosecution of the defendant or another. Same thing. These folks didn't know each other. They had everything that Chris Newsom had. There was absolutely no reason to kill him, except for, again, the knowledge that he had. He knew who his attackers were. He knew who the car judges were. He knew who the people were that were going to hurt James. He could identify. Again, number three, same thing with Ms. Christian, that this murder was knowingly committed, solicited, directed, or aided by the defendant while the defendant had a substantial role in committing or attempting to commit, or was fleeing after having a substantial role in committing or attempting to commit any first-degree murder of Shannon Christian, any rape of Shannon Christian by oral penetration, any rape by Shannon Christian by vaginal penetration, any rape by Shannon Christian by anal penetration, any rape by Hugh Christopher Newsom by anal penetration, any kidnapping of Shannon Christian, any kidnapping of Hugh Christopher Newsom, any robbery of Shannon Christian, or any robbery of Hugh Christopher Newsom. Again, that goes back to the felony murder counts, and we believe that the proof shows beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did have a substantial role in the commission of those crimes. And then finally, the fourth one is that the defendant knowingly mutilated the body of the victim after death. And that's going to be the file. You never would have known that Chris Newsom looked like that. Look at those autopsy photographs. We believe that the act of wrapping his body in that comforter, dousing his body with gasoline, set it on fire. That's mutilation. So at the conclusion of the hearing, we're going to stand back before you. I ask that you find these aggravating circumstances beyond a reasonable doubt and sentence the defendant to life without the possibility of parole. Now, in this hearing, you're going to hear from their parents. You give a little bit of insight into their lives. Thank you.
Actually, Dennis, if you don't mind, put the lights on, please. Sir. You have found Mr. Thomas to be criminally responsible, and we respect that decision. As Mr. Dillard and I have both said, your job as a jury has been to take a careful look at the evidence, and a careful look at the law, and to make a determination as to what the evidence is and how it fits into the law, and we respect your decision about that. The judge will instruct you, though, that criminal responsibility does not apply at this phase of the trial. This is the sentencing phase of the trial. And at the sentencing phase of the trial, you have to make an individualized determination about George Thomas. An individualized decision about George Thomas. And the law of criminal responsibility does not apply to that decision. That's something that you individually have to take a look at with respect to him as a person. You're going to hear from Bridget Thomas. Ms. Thomas has been in this courtroom throughout the entire trial. A number of Mr. Thomas's family members have been here. And I know this has been painful for the Christian and Newsom families. It's been painful for the Thomas family as well. You will hear from her. This is a photograph of Bridget, George, his brother and his sister. And you'll have to make a determination based on the testimony of Ms. Thomas, as well as the testimony that you've already heard in the case, about whether or not Mr. Thomas serves life imprisonment with the potential eligibility of release in the future, or he serves life imprisonment with no eligibility for release. Because it's really a misnomer to call it life without parole, because there is no parole. It's either life with the eligibility to earn sentencing credits and get out potentially in 51 calendar years. That's the decision to make. If you choose life, Mr. Thomas doesn't get out of prison. There's no way he gets out of prison for at least 51 years. And he's a young black man in his mid-20s. Do the math. Do the math. So you're either making a decision about that, or you're saying that he just serves the rest of his life in prison and doesn't even have the hope of potentially someday when he's an elderly man getting out. That's really what your decision is here. In the course of making that decision, there are several mitigating circumstances that you have to consider, that Ms. Thomas will talk about, and also that you can consider from the proof at the trial itself, the guilt-innocence phase that we just went through. And the judge will instruct you on those. There are 9 of them in this case, and here's what they are. The first is any lingering doubt about Mr. Thomas's role. You were instructed to make your finding in the guilt-innocence phase of trial under a beyond a reasonable doubt standard. Now, if you have any lingering doubt, unreasonable doubt, any lingering doubt in your head about his role in this case, and I respectfully submit to you that given the circumstantial evidence in this case, that there is still a lingering doubt. You can use that as a mitigating factor with respect to Mr. Thomas's sentence. The other one is just the fact that Mr. Thomas, as you have found, was criminally responsible. But there has been no argument from the state and no proof presented to you that he acted as a principal, that he was the one who actually committed a homicide with his own hands of Shannon Christian or Chris Newsom, or that he with his own hands was the one that committed the horrific molestation of both of those young people. That is a mitigating factor in this case that accounts for what his individualized role was. Because once again, sentencing is an individualized determination where you don't look at criminal responsibility, the law of criminal responsibility. The third thing is that Mr. Thomas has no significant prior criminal history. You heard about Marcus Davidson, who was in prison, and Eric Boyd, who's been in prison. You can take that into consideration with respect to Mr. Thomas. You can also take into consideration the fact that Mr. Thomas acted under duress or under the domination of other persons. You heard that proof from the first part of the trial. The youth of Mr. Thomas at the time of the offenses, in his early 20s. The effect that no possibility of release at all will have on Mr. Thomas's family. The effect on Mr. Thomas's mother of knowing that her son doesn't even have the hope of getting out when he is an elderly man, and the effect that that will have on her as a mother. That is a mitigating factor that you can consider. The fact that Mr. Thomas has a history of substance abuse and addiction, you've heard that in the first part of the trial. Any mercy that you have for Mr. Thomas as a human being, you can take into consideration at this individualized sentencing hearing for Mr. Thomas. And then finally, you can consider anything else about Mr. Thomas, about the facts of the case, about his role. You can consider anything else as a mitigating factor in providing him with a sentence of life in prison. Because like the judge will instruct you, even if you provide Mr. Thomas with a sentence of life imprisonment, that is still 51 years. There's no parole. He doesn't get out earlier than 51 years. That's mandated by statute. He has the opportunity to earn sentencing credits for good behavior while in prison that can reduce his sentence down to 51 years. That's it. So your decision here today is, does he serve 51 years? Potentially. Or does he serve the rest of his natural life? We ask you, for Mr. Thomas's family, for Bridget Thomas, let that family have some measure of hope, however small. Give him a sentence of life in prison. Thank you.
State first witness, please.
All right, this we approach. Tell us your name, spell your last name for us.
Dina Christian, Christian.
And Miss Christian, you are the mother of Shannon Christian?
Yes, sir, I am.
Let me ask you to identify these 7 pictures. We'll put them up here in just a second. I just want you to identify them. Those are pictures of Shannon
Yes, sir.
that you supplied to our office.
Yes, sir.
Put off the 1 through 7 into evidence. Please Exhibit 1.
That's a picture of Shannon and her brother Chase on a Christmas morning.
That was when she was younger.
Yes, sir. She was in middle school.
Okay.
And that's a picture of me and my two kids, Chase and Shannon, at Chase's graduation from high school.
And Chase is her younger brother?
No, he's a year older than she is.
I'm sorry. Year old.
She was my baby. That's a picture of Shannon and her best friend Kara.
Exhibit 3.
And that's a picture of Gary and I with Shannon on her high school graduation.
Exhibit 4.
And that's also Shannon's graduation from high school with her Nana and Pawpaw, her grandmother, and her brother and her dad.
So those are her grandparents.
Yes, sir. It's a picture of Shannon with her cousin Mackie. And that's a picture of Shannon and Chris.
Thank you. And you've prepared a written statement
Yes, sir.
concerning the impact of this on you and your family?
Yes.
Okay, can you read that for us?
Yes.
Read it to the jury in court.
Shannon was one of 2 miracles that happened in my life. When we had Chase, we were so happy, and then when Shannon was born, we had beaten the odds and we had our perfect family. She was a happy child who grew into a beautiful young woman who loved life. She was so loving and caring. She had gorgeous blue eyes and long, beautiful brown hair, and her smile was contagious. She'd just light up a room when she'd walk in. Shannon had the biggest heart. She loved her friends, she loved her family, and would do anything for those that she loved and cared for. She was loyal to a fault. She had her daddy wrapped around her little finger. She was Daddy's little princess, and he beamed with so much love and pride watching her grow into the person she had become. All she had to do was look at him and smile, and he was putty in her hands. Shannon adored her brother Chase. They had a very special bond, and they shared a lot of the same friends. She loved watching him play baseball. She followed him over 5 states just to watch him pitch. And when he left for college, if he didn't come home on the weekends, she and Kara would find a way to get in the car and off they'd go to visit with Chase. Shannon and Chase were very protective of each other, and they were always there for each other. The love between a mother and daughter is forever. She was more than just my daughter. She had become my friend. We'd talk about everything. We always had fun together, either getting our nails done, going shopping, spending Daddy's money, or just hanging around and watching TV. And when she wasn't at home, she would always call me to let me know where she was or just to check in, because she knew Mama was in World War. Between Chase and Shannon, our house was always full of kids, their friends. If you were their friend, you grew up in my house. I'm still mom to their friends today. Shannon and Kara have been joined at the hip since 3rd grade. They were more than just best friends, they became sisters. They did everything together. When Shannon would ask me to highlight her hair, I knew that wasn't just Shannon's hair I'd be highlighting. I'd be doing Kara's too that night. But I didn't mind because I love my girls. And now Kara's the only daughter I've got left. Shannon would have been 28 today had she not been murdered. but she was 21 years old when she was murdered. She was a senior at the University of Tennessee, majoring in sociology, and she would have graduated December of '07. She wanted to work in a field to help children because she loved kids. And while she was attending a full ride at UT, she was working 2 jobs. Shannon was hardworking, she was ethical, she was honest, loving, and considerate. She loved shopping, camping, UT football. She loved the lake and the beach, and she was just learning to play golf. But most of all, she just loved hanging out with her friends. And just like any young lady, she dreamed about her wedding. She pretty much had it all planned out, and she was ready for when that special day came. She wanted 4 children, but she wanted the first to be a boy because she wanted her other 3 to have a big brother just like her big brother Chase, to always watch over and protect her. It breaks what's left of my heart to see the hurt and pain in Gary and Chase's eyes every day, knowing there's nothing I can do to make it go away. We miss her. I miss her smile, her laugh, her beautiful eyes. I miss her hugs. Shannon made all of us better for knowing her. She was a much better person than I could ever be. She was very proud of her family, her friends, her school, and she was extremely proud of her faith in God. Now, a part of us is missing. There's a hole in our hearts that will never be filled. We will never be a complete family. Gary, Chase, and I think about Shannon every second of every day. The thought of what happened to her haunts us constantly. She endured more than any one person should ever have to bear. My perfect family is now broken, and it will never be the same. Thank you. What did you say?
Wait, no defense.
No.
Ms. Christian, thank you.
Gary Christian.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do.
Please tell us your name.
Gary Christian?
You are the father of Shannon Christian,
I am.
and you have a written statement as well.
I do.
Please share it with us.
Hill Christian. I remember her laying under the light in the delivery room. Her hands were very small, and they were balled up in a fist. And she opened her hands. I put my finger in the center of her little small hand. Exactly at that moment, I fell in love with my daughter. As I watched her close her fingers around my finger, I told her to hold on. I'd always be there for her. And I never let go. I remember her in her early school days. She had a very interesting idea that if she made a new friend, she had to have them come to our house as part of like her initiation. First, she wanted to introduce her to the plan of throwing as many monkey wrenches into her brother's and his friends' activities as they possibly could. The other thing that she would make sure that she instructed them in is where all the food was, and that there was no limit to what they could eat. I love coming home, seeing that. I remember her in her early school years, like elementary school, when she was in a play or a musical. She would always come to me and make sure that I was going to be there. She'd make sure I knew what time I had to be there. And I remember looking at her up on the stage just before the main event, her part. And I saw the fear on her face. And then she would go to her X on the floor of the stage. She would do her part. And then there was nothing but teeth. Her smile would come over her face. And I would melt. Just like in the delivery room. I always had pride. Just never knew what it really meant until my son and my daughter taught me. Dean and I, since day one, had no problems putting our children's needs in front of our own, because we didn't think for almost a year that we would be able to help children. I remember the doctor, after Dina's surgery, I was standing in front of the nursery window looking at all the babies. The doctor said, within the year you ought to be standing here looking at your own. Well, 13 months later, I was standing there looking at my own. And then Shannon came. What else can you ask for? 2 healthy children. A boy and a girl. Big brother to take care of little sister. It was easy for Dean and I to feel blessed every day. Just being able to watch them grow up. Shannon respected her family and her church and her friends. She worked hard in school. She made good grades. She took a great deal of pride in her jobs. Her work ethic was above reproach, according to the people she worked for. She had never been in any trouble. I think she only had one ticket in her life. I was really proud. And I wished I had the time in the day to tell you the conniving and the plan that she come up with in order for her to put herself in a position to receive what possession she had always wanted. Her brother suffered for it. But today we were able to give her a forerunner. She was really proud of that truck. She had wanted it for a long time. Her dream car. She and I made an agreement. I finally closed her. I said, I'll make the payments. You keep it clean. And as it worked out, I made the payments, I washed it, and she cleaned the inside. But it was always clean. She was true to her promise. I remember her telling me about her first boyfriend. I thought that was pretty funny. I remember our first date, and I remember the fear on my face. I remember our first dance. At my cousin's wedding. She was young, but I didn't have to bend over because she was tall. I believe she was trying to tell me something that I will never forget. She said, we'll dance again. In my wedding. She talked about that dance often. She was an excellent student. She worked for the money that she spent. Some of it. She had pride in her family. She had faith in God. She was her mother's best friend. She was her brother's biggest fan. She didn't follow him over 6 states, all the way from open league, all the way through college playing baseball. Because anybody made her go. She went because she loved and respected her brother. She supported him. And probably because of some of the guys that he played with. My family today is left with only memories. And we have no hope. There was none left. Most of her friends she grew up with, they were all great kids. She loved them very much. But somehow, some way, there was one that she made a sister. They knew everything about each other. They knew things that I didn't know, and certainly her mother didn't know. But they shared everything. She made care of her sister, and she took every opportunity when they were growing up to find reasons to make sure that she was able to tell me, well, it's okay if she comes too, because she is your other daughter. It's almost like she knew. Someday, I need a daughter in my life. Friends meant everything to her. Shannon Gail Christian was a good person. She wanted to help children. She wanted to have children. She wanted to have 4. Where that came from, I will never know. But she wanted to have a boy first, the big brother. She wanted to have a normal life with her own family. She was about to graduate at the University of Tennessee. She held 2 jobs. I am confident that she would have been a good Christian mother. And she would have made a positive difference. And the world is falling apart. I will never see our children. I will never see my grandchildren. I have no hope of that. And I will not ever dance. At her wedding. And I will never, ever let anybody forget. Thank you.
Any questions?
No, Your Honor.
Christie, thank you. Next, please.
Solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this case to be true. Solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this case to be true, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Give us your name, please.
Mary Newsom.
And you are the mother of Chris Newsom,
Yes, I am.
and you have some photographs that you supplied to us.
Yes.
I'm going to look through them. You recognize Exhibit 8, number 9,
Yes.
number 10, number 11,
Yes.
number 12,
Yes.
number 13.
Yes.
They're all photographs of Mr. Newsom, Chris Newsom. Put those in as Exhibits 8 through 13. Okay. Exhibit 8. Tell us about this photograph.
This is when he played for the Knoxville Stars. That was a baseball team that was a traveling team.
Okay. Exhibit 9.
That was at senior day when the last time they were playing baseball, and they were all kind of sad that it was coming to an end that day.
Okay. Exhibit 10.
That was the graduation picture when he graduated from high school.
Exhibit 11.
That was in his cap and gown.
Exhibit 12.
Well, he was just juggling some balls. Just like to just do things like that.
Exhibit 13.
That was at Christmas time. He ended up getting the wrong present. That was supposed to be to my mother. It was a yellow quilt.
You have a statement prepared.
I do.
You want to share that, please?
Chris was a Christian. He loved life and he lived it to the fullest. He was an athlete. He played baseball, football, and golf. He loved motorcycles and attended American Motorcycle Institute in Florida and was certified in watercraft and motorcycle repair. He was also a trim carpenter and he loved his work. He was a perfectionist at it. He was an artist as well. He was 6 feet tall, had dark brown hair, hazel eyes, and a great smile that he used 90% of the time. He loved helping his friends and family whenever the situation came up. He had a lot of friends, and he loved children. His nieces and nephews thought he hung the moon. He loved his family. He loved going to the lake, skiing, fishing, and he also enjoyed snowboarding. anything that was athletic or outdoors, he was there. He called me one afternoon to tell me he sold his motorcycle. I was really surprised, and when I asked him why, he told me he wanted to live. He loved Shannon and wanted a future. A kind, loving person, he would have been a great father. We now have to watch his friends get married, go to their weddings, and sit there and then watch them have their babies now. And that is a very hard thing to do. We will never get to hold his babies or see them. Our life has been changed in a devastating way, and our health has been compromised. I have to do the rest of my life knowing that this loving, caring person spent how he spent his last days on earth. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms.
Mr. Newsom?
You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
That's it.
Give us your name, please, sir,
Hugh Newsom.
and your relationship to Mr. Chris Newsom.
I was the proud father of Chris.
And you have a prepared statement to read to the jury today.
Yes.
Can you read that, please?
I remember the day I was at work, TVA here in downtown Knoxville, and Mary came by and had me paged at the reception desk to tell me that we were going to have a little boy. Now, Mary and I had 3 children at this time, 2 girls and 1 boy, but I was obviously tickled to death to have a boy to carry on my name. Looking back on Chris's life, I played baseball in high school, and I guess I thought he should too. I started him in T-ball before he started kindergarten. We went through 14 years of baseball, from rec teams, traveling teams, and then he finished his baseball playing time with the Halls High School baseball team. We traveled with the traveling teams to national championships, tournaments in New Orleans, Minneapolis, Orlando, and a number of other cities, including Nashville. We had a wonderful time during those years, and I'll never forget those. In this room, there sits 31 trophies, along with 4 medallions showing his achievements in playing baseball. I go up to that room from time to time, but you know, to me, it's pretty empty, regardless of how many trophies, how many medallions, how many other things up there that shows his achievements. Mary, I saw her coming down the steps one day, the stairs, with his laundry basket. In that laundry basket was the clothes he had changed out of. This was about a week after he met his untimely death. And these were the clothes he had changed out of after playing golf that day. And he had put them in the laundry basket. And Mary was coming down the stairs with this laundry basket. And I said, "Mary, what are you going to do with that?" She said, I'm going to do his laundry one more time. In his room, there are 23 blue ribbons that were awarded to him during the field days over Brickey Elementary School. And at that particular time, his grandmother Gray was living, and she insisted on sitting out in that hot sun for field day. And Chris would walk over to her and pin those blue ribbons on her. And she was tickled to death. She didn't notice the heat at all, as long as he was winning blue ribbons. Chris's grandmother suffered a stroke shortly after his death and had to reside in a nursing home. And in the window of her room, she had a picture of Chris and Shannon. She had this picture positioned in an exact location, and it was actually kind of at an angle, not a 90-degree point. And I said something to one of the nurses, why don't you straighten that picture? And one of the nurses says, I ain't messing with that picture. Says, I caught the wrath of her because I moved that picture the other day. And she informed me that she had that picture positioned to where she could see Chris and Shannon from any place in that room, including laying down on her bed. That nurse said, you want to move it, you move it, but I'm not. Chris would have been a great father, I believe, based on the fondness that he showed for his nieces and nephews. And they were really fond of him also. In fact, the two older ones, Megan and Allie, were the first two of the family that met Shannon. He took them shopping with him over at Westtown Mall, and he went into the store that Shannon was working in. And afterwards, as they were walking out, and a little bit later out on down in the mall, Megan turned to him and said, why didn't you kiss her goodnight? He went back and kissed her goodnight. Generally, when they came over to the house, they come busting through the door. The first question they ask is, Uncle Chris here? And if the answer was yes, up the stairs they went to his bedroom. Grandma and Grandpa really became secondary at this particular time. And you know, now they're left with an emptiness and a sadness. And I've been deprived of spoiling his grandkids, or my grandkids, his kids. While still in high school, Chris joined the Young Life group at Halls High School and attended Windy Gap summer sessions that the group sponsors. In fact, he went to 2 straight years of them, once as a volunteer to help. On his return, he joined the Beaver Dam Baptist Church in Halls, and this was where his funeral was held and friends received. We received friends for around 7 hours on that particular date. Floral arrangement we placed on his casket contained 4 of his favorite caps that he wore. Some friends arranged for his guest book, and it's been open, and they paid for it. Some of the family loyal friends paid for it. And the number of pages now are somewhere between 300 and 400 pages. Chris had artistic talent. He could sit down and draw and sketch almost really life-type images. He won the Halls Middle School Gallery Award with a charcoal sketch entitled Human Still Life. And this hung, they thought it was such display of talent that school wanted to keep it in the art department. And it hung there for several years until after his death we asked if we could retrieve it. We were afraid it would get misplaced or something. And it now hangs in our home. And as Mary mentioned, he did receive his certification from the Motorcycle Watercraft American Motorcycle Institute in Daytona Beach, Florida. After that, Chris started to work in a motorcycle watercraft repair shop in Oak Ridge. Here he became friends with a young black kid that went to the Oak Ridge High School, and Travis didn't have any transportation. He'd walk from the high school down to the shop in the afternoons after school. Chris would take him home after the shop closed each night, and he lived in what is known as Scarborough Village, a predominantly black community there in Oak Ridge. But Chris was not afraid to go into that particular area because he had black friends as well as white friends. Later, when Chris met his untimely death, I had kind of forgotten about Travis. He came through the line at the funeral. He had hitchhiked from Oak Ridge to Halls to attend Chris's funeral. I'll never forget the sadness of the expression he had on his face. There was tears rolling down his cheeks, and I hugged him, and I ensured he had a ride back to Oak Ridge before I turned him loose. Chris would hardly say anything bad about anyone, which is not one of my best things. I remember him admonishing me one day when I said something about one of his friends, and you're treading on dangerous territory when you did that. I'll never forget that conversation. He was putting Armor All on his truck tires, and he put so much Armor All on those tires to make them look new and shiny that when I bought it, I'd have to hide it from him or he'd use it all up. Anyway, I said something about one of his friends while he was bent over putting that on his tires, and he looked up at me and said, "Dad, you don't have to say things like that about him. He's had a rough time." I'll never forget that conversation. Chris's friends honored him, as Mary has mentioned, in 3 of their weddings. They had a special table, picture of him, and in some instances, roses by his picture. His older brother Dennis also did that with the positioning of 1114 portrait at the altar, so that the wedding picture included that portrait. And as Mary mentioned, he did work with Bailey and Fry Construction Company, which was a trim carpenter. They did trim work, and he did excellent trim work. I went over to him one time while he was working on it. It was about a $500,000 house, and I said, "Chris, do you really know what you're doing?" And he said, "Well, what do you think?" And I looked at it, and he said, I mess up a corner every now and then, but you know, I do it over till I get it right. There was a little bit of an uh-oh pile there also from the quarter round stuff. But he had ideal co-workers, Brad Bailey and Joe Fry, and when work got slow, they'd take off, go fishing, go snowboarding. One of his co-workers Brad Bailey told us he never wanted to forget Chris, so he named his first son Ryland Christopher, born after Chris's death. In this outline that I have to follow in writing this, it mentions allowance for stating monetary losses I've suffered since his death and having to beat court dates and such. Since January the 7th, 2007, I have turned down job offers as a consultant, subcontractor, and my name is still on two of FEMA contractors' response rosters. I've never done one day's work for FEMA at this time due to this. I've been called 6 to 10 times. I want to remain here close to my family and attend every court hearing, and this is numbered at this point over 300 thus far, 300 court appearances. This resulted in hundreds of thousands of dollars of lost income, but you know there's things more important than money. It doesn't bother me anymore, because if I could have my son back for just a short period of time to tell him how much I love him, I'd give all the money I have and all I'd ever earn and go live on the street. That's how much I miss him. There'll always be an emptiness created by the senseless death of Chris and Shannon. A statement from, she's now 11 years old, one of our granddaughters, one day left me in tears, not really knowing what to say. She looked up at Grandma and said, "Grandma, I miss Uncle Chris so much." We'll get together for some of the holidays and for Christmas with our 3 remaining children, and I love them dearly. There's 7 grandchildren. And after the presents are exchanged at Christmas time and unwrapped, and the ones who wanted something else express their dismay tactfully, and several will schedule a trip, secret trip to the exchange department on December the 26th, because nothing ever fits, or they'll try to exchange it for something else that they prefer. I'll look around and there'll still be an empty chair, because Chris is not there. This year, as you people gather to celebrate Christmas or other holidays and talk about your annual achievements, and remember the Newsom and Christian families, because we both have empty places at our table. We lost 2 great kids, not just one. Jake Mabee with the Hall's Shopper coined a phrase while doing an article honoring Chris, which included some of his baseball achievements and statements from friends as how much they thought of Chris. And you have to understand some baseball lingo to fully get the impact of this. He ended an article he wrote right after Chris died, and he said he was sitting there and he could not determine how to end this article. He said he felt divine intervention helped him. And this is what he wrote: "No one can hurt Chris Newsom anymore, and he doesn't have to run fast around third base to throw to home plate, because now Chris Newsom is safe at home." Thank you for your attendance. kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further from the state?
No further program. Safe.
Fence?
We call Bridget Thomas.
Raise your right hand, please. You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this case to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Raise your right hand, please. You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this case to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Could you tell us your full name, please, ma'am?
Bridget Monique Thomas.
And Ms. Thomas, where do you live?
I live in Inkster, Michigan. In Michigan?
Okay. Is that close to Detroit?
Yes.
About how far would you say?
About 50 miles out of Detroit.
And are you employed there in Inkster?
Not yes.
What's your occupation?
I'm a direct care worker.
How long have you been a direct care worker?
About 23 years.
Ms. Thomas, do you recognize this young man sitting over here in the white shirt?
Yes, I do.
That's your son?
Yes, it is.
And Ms. Thomas, let me show you this birth certificate and see if you recognize that. Kind of hard to see, but
Yes, that's a certificate of birth of my son, George Giovanni Thomas.
and it shows that he was born January 22nd, 1983.
January 23rd, 1983.
January 23rd, I'm sorry, January 23rd, 1983.
Yes.
And where was that?
That was at Hurley Medical Center in Flint, Michigan.
Your Honor, I believe that's been marked as Exhibit 14.
All right.
Does that also show George's birth?
Yes, it does. January 23rd, 1983.
January 23rd. It's Exhibit 15. Now, you were living in Inkster, Michigan when George was born.
Yes.
Did you continue to live there in Inkster
Yes.
all the time George was growing up?
Yes.
Let me show you another picture, Ms. Thomas. Does this, you recognize that picture?
Yes, that's George. He had to be about 3 to 4 years old.
Did he have brothers, sisters?
Yes.
And that's Exhibit 16, Your Honor. Who's in this photograph, Ms. Thomas?
That's George and his brother, Doc. We call him Doc.
That George on the left?
Yes.
And about what age were they at that time?
They had to be like 3 and 5. George being 3 and his brother being 5.
Was George a good kid growing up?
Yes.
Did he give you any trouble?
No.
Is this a little later picture of George?
Yes.
And who else is in that picture?
my daughter Brittany, his brother Willie, we call him Doc, and George.
And that's George on the right,
Yes.
and Brittany,
Brittany,
and...
yes. Everybody get it
And
mixed
Willie.
up. Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, that's Exhibit 18. Ms. Thomas, let me show you this picture as well. Is that a picture of George a little later in life?
Yes, it is.
How old would you say George is in that picture?
In that picture, George had to be like 8 years old.
Did he go to school there in Inkster?
It was considered Dearborn Heights, but yes, that was our school district.
Okay. It's Exhibit 19. And Ms. Thomas, tell us about this. This looks like the same picture over here in, that we just saw. And what exactly is this?
That was just a certificate for doing a good job. Keeping up on his classroom behavior and keeping up the good work.
And that was dated November 25th, 1992, if I'm reading that correctly down here at the bottom. You see that?
Yes.
Is that the right date? So George would have been 9 years old at that time?
Yes.
Now, let's skip to a little bit later in life, Ms. Thomas. Do you recognize the folks in that picture?
Yes. My son George Thomas. My son, that's George, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
My nephew Curry. Yes.
here in the middle. Okay,
And then my oldest son, Willie.
that's Willie. Do you remember the occasion for that picture?
Yes, that was at a family reunion.
And where was that family reunion?
It was at Peoria, Illinois.
Do you know about how old George would have been in that picture?
I want to put him at about 15, 14.
14. And Your Honor, that's Exhibit 21, I believe, that did not introduce Exhibit 20 and Exhibit 19, the prior exhibits. And Ms. Thomas, is this a little later photograph in George's life?
Yes.
And again, who are the big people in this photograph? We have
My daughter Brittany,
Brittany,
Willie, his
Willie.
brother, and George.
and George. What approximate age was George at that time?
I believe he might have been about 15, just really going on 16.
Okay. Is he still living there in Inkster with you?
Yes.
And that's Exhibit 22. And Ms. Thomas, this is another picture of the three, right?
Yes.
This is George,
George.
Willie,
Yes.
and Brittany.
Yes.
Remember the occasion for that photograph?
It was just a family portrait that I wanted all three of my children together.
And what age is George in this picture? Approximately.
We took the pictures so close together, so he'd be like 15, 16
Okay.
years old.
and that's Exhibit 23. All right, you can turn the lights on. Ms. Thomas, George was living at home until approximately what age?
About 19.
So that would have been roughly 2002, sometime around in there?
Yes.
And during that, let's say just roughly 2002, where were you working?
During the time, I might have had working as a direct care worker, and then also as a CNA, a certified nurse's aide.
So how many, you were holding two jobs at once?
Yes.
Working approximately how many hours a week?
I can work anywhere from 48 hours a week, 48 hours a week.
Okay.
And it could be more.
Ms. Thomas, you and I have talked about the choices here, have we not, between life and what's called life without parole?
Yes.
And you understand that if the jury decided to give your son life, that would basically mean 51 years in prison.
Yes.
And that he would be eligible for actual release at that time.
Yes.
But if the other option, he would be in prison for the rest of his life.
Yes.
You understand?
Yes.
And in effect, he would die in prison.
Yes. Yes. Excuse me. Yes.
The fact that he might, when he's a very elderly person, have the opportunity to be released, what does that mean to you?
That I may not be around to see it. 50 years, 50 years will make me 100 years old.
Does it give you some satisfaction, though, that he might be released at some point?
Yes, it would. It would give me satisfaction just to know that the court will have mercy on him. I understand what took place. And my heart goes out to the families. Sincere for the family. But I want the hearts to go out to my family also. To know that I have a son too, that I would not see. I would not be able to see his children, my grandchildren. And you may look at me and say, so what? But we can only go by the evidence of what's been said. Nothing, DNA, nothing found against him. And I can only beg for mercy of the court that you feel as though that he should get 51 years. 51 years that I won't be able to see my son at any given time. If I live to make it for another 51 years, only by God's mercy and grace. And that's why I'm asking you right now to show mercy and grace. Just let the Lord lead your heart. And I believe in God. And I believe that one day that I will see my son. And I'm standing and believing on that because God is good. Through it all, God is good. And that's all I can really say is I know that God is good. There's more to it than this. And I don't know what it is, the outcome, that God one day would just turn things around. Because my God is in the business of doing miracles. And I believe in that. So I'm just asking for mercy and grace. Not a life sentence, but with parole. And I just thank you. Just think about it, you know.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. You're with me.
Questions? Thank you. Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I want to introduce those exhibits.
All right.
Just to make sure, Your Honor, we've got, I think we missed Exhibit 17. Introducing it. Okay.
Anything
That's all
else?
our witnesses, Your Honor.
All right. Members of the jury, we'll break for 10 minutes. When you come back into the courtroom, you'll hear the closing arguments of the attorneys and my instructions as to the law. Thank you. One thing additional on the record here, Mr. Dillard, I don't know that you actually have a moment hearing or a sentencing hearing, but your client did have a right to testify at this sentencing hearing, and I want to make sure that he understood that he has a right to testify and that he's foregone that voluntarily. Is there any question about that?
No, Your Honor.
You want to quickly question him?
Well, I need to find my outline for that.
Well, I don't know. He can just remain in place. Mr. Thomas, if you raise your right hand, swear to tell the truth, all truth, and nothing but true self you got.
Yes. Mr. Thomas, you understand that during this sentencing hearing, no one could force you to testify, but you have a right to remain here and not testify. Yes. You also have the right to testify during the course of the sentencing hearing if you so desire, and no one can prevent you from testifying if you want to. Yes. And you and I and Mr. Johnson talked about that as well, did we not? Yes. And it was your voluntary decision not to testify during the sentencing. Correct.
All right. Okay. Thank you. We'll break for 10 minutes.